Hey everybody, this is Eddie Dacius. We are on our 18th episode. This episode is brought to you by Dacius Facilities Management. Dacius Facility Management, they will manage your property with a variety of services, locksmithing, cleaning, building maintenance, facility management, construction. Call them now 617-237-0106 or go online at daciusfm.com. Today we have a great Stephanie. She's a lawyer, and we're gonna be introduce her. So she's our guest today. So Delia will be talking about her experience of upcoming, and we're gonna learn a lot from her.
Welcome to the Divine Purpose Podcast, where we transport you along one of the more dynamic journeys of life. Have you ever been curious to know what it takes to become a successful leader? Or about knowing the secrets of life through the Bible? How about engaging in conversation where no topics are off limits? We will take you to new levels with guests who can help you grasp the importance of your calling. Now, here's your host, Eddie Dacius, founder of Dacius Facilities Management.
So let's get Delia here. Delia, how are you today?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So one thing we like to do is to try to know the guests. So you have the platform. Tell us about you. If you want to talk about your family, your background, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I am Stephanie Delia. I was born in Haiti in 1980. Sorry. And I came to the U.S. when I was about 7 years old and have lived here ever since. I started my transition to the U.S. not speaking English well. I came in 87 and I moved into New York City. Those of you who know that there was a lot of anti-Haitian sentiment around that time.
Oh man!
So it was an interesting time to immigrate to the U.S. as a Haitian child.
You're good. Sorry.
No, that's good. Go right ahead. That's it.
No. You keep going.
No, I was about to say, I started in elementary. So when I got to elementary school, outside of the general anti-Haitian, because at that time they were saying that Haitians brought AIDS to the U.S. We're considered
right.
poor. There was a lot of that happening. But on top of that, you have to add, if you're Haitian, your parents don't do ripped jeans and dirty T-shirts to school.
So you have
in
to
a
be
culture.
clean. Yeah.
So in a culture, and if you think back to the 80s, the look was the ripped jeans, sagging, the oversized T-shirt. So I had the general anti-Haitian, and then I had parents who were like, I don't care, your jeans are going to fit, they're going to be ironed, they're going to be crisp.
Oh, man.
Had the
I remember that,
Yeah, so it was a lot of, I did not fit in any way, in any shape, it was just, you could not be less welcome than I was when I started my life here.
Really, I'm sorry to hear that. But how did you get? How did you adjust to all the? I think it's a culture shock for you. How did you adjust in that environment?
It was a combination. I was blessed to have been in a bilingual class. My teacher back then was Haitian. She reminded me a lot of Claire Huxtable. So just to give you an idea about her, she was very proper and prim and spoke French, but loved being Haitian. She was proud of it. And so I was in a space during the academic portion of my day where I was sitting in the classroom with a great example of Haitian women. And it was, they were very welcoming and inviting. The students in the class were Haitian. So we kind of had our own little bubble in the building. Yeah. Then you combine that with my home life. So my dad and I are practically identical. I'm the female version of him. And Coincidentally, when they conceived me, he was actually aiming for a boy.
Oh boy, okay.
Didn't work out. um, but one of his responses when I'd come home and I'd be like, "Oh my God, these kids hate me, and I'm horrible," and yada yada, was that he'd say, "First, you have my DNA, and second, you practically have my face. Like, we can't let people who do not see." Yeah, he was very much like, "I'm dope, so therefore you must be dope." And that was kind of the end of it for him. He was a very confident man. And he had a problem with the idea that somebody who had his whole face had the nerves and the audacity to question that was a positive thing.
No, I think that's helped you, right? That's really helped you.
It worked out. It worked out.
So, how was it in the family? Like, I know growing up in Haitian household is just hard, and all our guests is talking about l'école, l'église, la caille. Was it for you the same?
Absolutely.
Oh man.
It was a very strict Haitian household. You were not allowed to the batkana lawi, which is
yep.
There's nothing in the lawi for you. We had to eat rice and beans and chicken when everyone else could have McDonald's. There was no spending the night at friend's house. We couldn't be out late. We couldn't go out to kids' teens parties, even if the parents were going to be there.
Oh, but sleepovers.
Sleepover was not going to happen. Just wasn't. I didn't even bother asking.
Oh man!
You went much further than I did. I was trying to stay a little later when I was at the library.
Okay.
So no matter where I was going with my friends, we were going to the library. That was, my friends would be like, "Why can't we just tell them that, we're going to go to the mall?" I'm like, "You don't know Haitian parents. We're going to the library." And our goal is to get permission to stay at the library a little later today.
Okay. So let's talk about you growing up in like you transitioned from Haiti and you now in the US. So what can you tell about the things you were really excited about, even there was some difficulty along the way, but things you really liked happening to you either in school or in your family?
I'm so sorry. I hated the experience moving here. I wanted to go back for years.
Go ahead. Yeah, tell us.
Yeah, I didn't want to stay. I had no choice. I had to stay. But eventually I adjusted. But I don't think I was ever actually happy about being here. I wanted to go back to Haiti. I wanted to live in Haiti. I wanted to stay in Haiti. I came in elementary. I hated being here in elementary. Junior high, I made friends in junior high. I adjusted. I had a good life in junior high,
okay.
But I never quite liked America. I'm not gonna lie to you. It was kind of like, I'm stuck here, so I'll adjust. But it was never a point where I'm like, "Ooh, this is great."
But what? Okay, so let's reverse it. What did you miss in Haiti?
Oh my God, everything. So I think while I came here only at 7, my memory of Haiti was, one, I loved warmth. New York is only warm for a very short period of time.
Yes.
So you have to put this experience as coming from an island, being an island girl, hating the idea of snow, to being stuck in New York, where we get warmth for a couple of months. So I missed warm weather. Petit. I missed the warm weather. I missed the freedom that was associated. So in the Haitian culture, your community is not defined by a household. It's defined by the village. Yeah. And so after school, the idea of going in the house wasn't really a thing, right? After school, you eat, and then everybody runs around.
Yeah,
exactly. Like I still remember Sunday dinner, my grandma would separate plates for all the neighbors. And so we'd have to carry portions of the food to the neighbors. Yeah. But here's the kicker. All their kids were bringing food to the neighbors too. So we'd end up with 10 plates. And I'm like, you people, why do I have to walk out in the sun bringing food to people who already got their own food? Yeah. So much food that they're sending to you too. In retrospect,
wow,
it was a beautiful thing. But that's just an example, right? Our village On Sundays, we'd go to church.
Okay.
The grandparents would cook really early. Then we'd spend many hours in church. Then we'd come back home. We'd have Sunday dinner. And then we'd literally have to bring plates to our neighbors' houses of the food. And in the same time, the kids were bringing it to us. We played together after school as soon as our homework was done. There was just a lot of community. The other parents could, if they saw me doing anything wrong, I'd get in trouble. So growing up in Haiti, I wasn't concerned about getting caught by my parents. I was getting caught by gamoun.
Yeah.
Any gamoun was a problem, right? Like if I was cutting school, any person who looked like an adult, I was ducking from.
Yeah.
Because if you were a gamoun, I presumed your job was to make sure I was okay, to watch over me. And they did. If they caught somebody else's kid doing something reckless, you would be sitting in your house minding your business, thinking you got away with it, and you'd hear them. And then
wow, man, no, that was the best thing. Right? And everybody was like in the lookout, for each other.
Yes, everyone looked out for everyone.
So one thing I was talking to a few people the other day was saying on Sunday, where like we get dressed really nice, and then we go for something called promenade, and then we go walking, and that's something we miss. But so did you have a conversation with your parents telling you you're gonna be moving to the US?
No, so my parents came. My parents came ahead of me, so that they can get jobs, buy a house, and stabilize. They'd visit every year, but they lived here for a while. I knew I was going to stay with them for a while. I think I just assumed if I didn't like it, I could go back, and I also assumed I would like it. So, and in their defense, I don't think anyone could have prepped you for what happened to be occurring in the 80s in New York City. It didn't know that AIDS was going to become a thing, and the presumption was not presumption, but the rumors were going to start to swirl that AIDS was from Haiti. The crime rate in the 80s was really high, so they were extra strict, whereas in Haiti, I lived, very comfortably. I ran around my village with no fear, no concern. So they didn't prep me, but I don't think it's a matter of them not prepping me properly. I think they were kind of witnessing it develop themselves. And so they had nothing to tell me because they just didn't know.
Wow. So let's go back to your education, early education. Now you're here, junior high. So what was the transition going to high school?
High school was simple. So my parents told me all my life that I wanted to be an attorney, which I think most Haitians are told that we want to be an engineer, an attorney, or a doctor.
Yes.
As an adult, I'm starting to suspect that I never actually said it. They just claimed I did.
Yeah.
So I chose to go to a high school, which is in a neighborhood in Richmond Hill, in Queens, which is where I grew up in New York, and it was known for law. So it was kind of had a pre-law program. Okay. And I enjoyed that experience. I ran track. I did the triple jump, which I loved. So it was a good experience. It had a lot of minorities in the school. It was good. It was good times.
But so were you involved in a lot of activity? I know you say you went track, but was it other activities you were part of, or were you part of a group, a Haitian group, or did you get more transition and then be involved in your school? Was it something you did, or like some parents, Haitian parents? The reason I'm asking about it because I had a guest, which the episode is available today. She was saying her parents allow her to do sleepovers, do a lot of other things, but I know typical Haitian, that's not gonna happen. So I don't know. Can you share your experience?
So in high school, by the time I was in junior high, I had assimilated quite well. I would say I loved America per se, but I got it, right? I was comfortable. I spoke the language well enough. I got along with folks. So I was okay. When I went to high school, I decided to join the track team. And let me take it back. I was kind of recruited for the track team. I was tall, skinny, and I think my coach was like, "Oh, you got long legs. You might be able to run." And no lie. I really think that's how it went down.
Okay.
So it worked out because while I didn't like track per se. I loved the long jump and the triple jump. So I was more of an athlete. I was always working out. I was always practicing. I loved it. I had the athletes were all friends with one another. So the basketball team, the track team, the volleyball team, we kind of all were one big crew. It didn't matter what sport you played. All the athletes in this school really got along well. So it was a pretty good life. My grades were fine. There was nothing to complain about. I wasn't extraordinary, but I wasn't struggling. It was just an ordinary high school life.
Okay, so let's talk about now your interest for law. And you said it was since you were little. Can you talk about it?
Yeah, so I don't really know if it was since I was little. I was told it was. I question that now because my parents told me that I told them I wanted to be a lawyer when I was about 4 years old. My daughter is currently 4. And so I'm convinced that there was no way that at 4 years old, I could have formed the idea of what a lawyer is. Yeah, I was like, at 4 years old, you know what you see. You don't really know what a lawyer does. So now I know better. But for my whole life, I was like, okay, I've wanted to do this since I was 4. It must be what I want to do.
Okay.
So I went to undergrad in John Jay College of Criminal Justice, which was a great school. Love the school. It's a city school. And I actually chose it because at the time that I was deciding which school I wanted to go to, I was going to go to this other school called St. John's. And the OJ trial was happening, and all of the experts were professors at John Jay. So and this is pre-Google. So I became obsessed with John Jay because so it has a lot of programs that are criminal justice based, but one of the experts that were discussing the science behind, not the science, but that were testifying about how the glove not fitting was the best strategy. And this, if you know the OJ trial, one of the big things was like, they made him try on the glove didn't fit. And so the idea was if the glove don't fit, then it couldn't have been him, right? The glove that was used in the crime. And so post-trial, the experts that actually were part of the strategy were John Jay professors. But here's the kicker. They actually were fully aware that liquids will make leather shrink over time. And I was so obsessed with the genius that I was like, I gotta go to this school. And it did not disappoint. I met great professors. It wasn't a big university, so you couldn't get lost in it. They actually had a Haitian club. They had so many clubs: Caribbean club, Latina club, Dominican club, Puerto Rican club, Haitian club, you name it, it was there. But I loved it. Loved the school. So,
and we refer to the guest. Her name is Bianca Jordan. She did a great podcast with us. She was saying she didn't like law school. She didn't like it. She wouldn't do it again. But let's hear about your story then.
Yeah, so I love being a lawyer, and I'm grateful that I get the opportunity to do what I do. Now I'm living the life where when they say, if you would do what you're doing for free, you're doing the right thing, I'm there. I would absolutely do this for free. I can't because, unfortunately, passion doesn't pay bills, but I love what I do. That said, the law school experience itself, I wasn't fond of it. It's law school is incredibly competitive, right? So from the minute you enter the process, you're ranked from the first, and our class had 500 students, so from first to 500.
What? Repeat that again. What is it?
Law school is incredibly competitive, right? So from the beginning of the process, you are trying to be top of your class. But the rankings literally will be from the top to the bottom. And so upon graduation, students know where they're ranked, which means somebody in every graduating class graduated last in their class.
Wow.
Exactly, right? But I say that to say
that's a challenge, right?
It is, but I say that to say the process itself is really about competition. And I think as an attorney, understanding all of the injustices in our country, right? The criminal justice system is by far one of the most controversial
Okay.
right? And that is because we know historically certain groups, specifically Blacks and Brown people, are more likely to get higher sentences, or more likely to get convicted, or more likely to be arrested for the types of crimes that almost everyone commit. So understanding that and then creating a system where you really are competing to win, I think it was an interesting experience because most attorneys are focused on winning. And while the concept of that sounds great, when you enter a system that is already more likely than not to be unjust, all you care about is winning, you might have some problems. And so that's why I didn't like the law school process, because part of it was that I think it was way too focused on competition. Two, it felt like learning a brand new language. Go ahead.
So let's kind of dive into this, and this is very interesting for me to know more, and I think our viewers will agree with me. So you said it's competitive. Can you get more detail on why, and then give us some example? When you
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So when you get into law school, you want to do well, but it's beyond that. There's, at least in our school, there's something called booking a class, right? And that is doing the very best essay. And your essay will often be the example of what people could use. So that means it's not enough to get an A. It's to really get the best A. And there is such a thing as the highest A in law school. It's true. And man. So, wow. So I say that to say, you're not focused on understanding the material and discussing it. You're focused on understanding the material and being able to discuss it, but also being able to do better than the person next to you. And it has to be better than the person next to you. Good is not good enough in law school, right? Better than everyone else is the goal. And that's why you'll have top 5 and top 10 and, the dean's list. And so you're competing for all of these things that the presumption is that the person who scores the highest grade is the one who understood the material the best. But in fact, it's really often the person who takes the test the best. It's the person who can cram the best. It's the person who understands their study style the best. Sometimes it's really the person with the least amount of stress.
Oh, wow.
So it's a very interesting thing that, I became part of the system. I had to compete. I had to excel. I had to be better than the other students. But also add another layer. My law school had about 500 students that were split into equal groups, about 250 apiece. There was no more than a maximum of about 10 to 15 Black students in each of the courses. In each of the groups. Yeah. So you're a minority in that aspect, but then you're competing, to be on the top.
Yes.
There's so many layers. The bottom line is I didn't like law school as an experience. I liked maybe about 2 to 3 classes that I genuinely enjoyed. But I think the law school system itself is intended to set you up to become so focused on being the best and mastering this concept and winning that it takes some of us away from the reason we even went to law school. I actually wanted to be a lawyer because I wanted to fight for justice. And when I went to law school, the law school experience itself didn't allow that. I did some internships that allowed me to do it, but law school itself, there's no place for fighting for justice. You're fighting to win. You get the best A, you get the best, grade, you make the dean's list, you book the class, you make top 10, and you get a good job with a high salary.
So it's a track. So from when you get enrolled to when you finish, you have to constantly get where you went, how much the grade, is it the way it is? The way you...
It has to be. Yeah. Wow. Well, so even access to certain internships, you gotta, only a certain group is gonna be offered. It wasn't until after I finished research and writing that I realized you had to be invited to advanced writing. And I didn't even realize that until one of my friends, who I'm like, wait, how are you not taking this? It's just like I wasn't invited. And I'm like, oh. So I realized then, I was like, oh, groups are selected, and I'm assuming based on grades. So yeah, it's just a competitive process. It's incredibly competitive.
Wow.
And then there's I'll tell you the other trick is I excelled very early on, and that is the very worst thing you could do because now you're competing against yourself, right? So I ended up getting one of the highest A's in torts. I think it was my second semester, which was my first year. And then my second year, my grades went down, right? So while I was still top 20%, I was no longer top 5. And I was really depressed.
Oh, man. Really?
In retrospect, you look at that and you're like, what the hell is wrong with you? But you're in this little circle where I felt like a complete failure because
pressure.
And the student, I say that to say, had I done decent, I probably would have been incredibly proud and excited about my ranking my second year. But because I had done well at the beginning and I wasn't able to keep up that level of success, I felt like it was a complete nightmare. And I hated school even more. So I was in the space that I despised. I had spent so much money on it that I could not get out. So I had to get the degree because I was going to pay it back.
Oh, man.
Life, right?
Okay.
It was like, I got to pay this money back, so I got to be a lawyer because if I'm not a lawyer and I owe 6 figures, I'm screwed. Right? Like I'm double screwed. So it wasn't a good place to be. I went through it because I felt that I had no choice. If I did, I would have left. If there was a way to get out of the debt, I would not be a lawyer today. That's it. I would have been out happily. But now I'm glad I did it though. I say all of that to say I love being a lawyer. I love what I do. I'm grateful. I'm blessed. All that good stuff. Today.
And I'm glad you're sharing this because Bianca Jordan, she mentioned the same thing. She said she didn't have any choice. She had to be because she was dead on a lot of debt. So she had to be continuously going forward because there was no way out. You keep going to the tunnel until you see the light because that was what happened to her. And you said the same thing. But now let's go to what do you think will entail to be a good lawyer? In your opinion?
Yeah, I think passion. I think there's a famous quote that I remember being told in law school that there's no place for passion in the law. It's an interesting dynamic, right? Because there's a school of thought that believes in order to be a successful lawyer, right? In order for law to be just, you must focus on the facts and just the facts. You can't let your emotions and your feelings get into it because then you're likely to become easily swayed, when in fact you should be focused on the facts. I come from a different school of thought. I believe that if you don't have passion for the field that you're in, you should not be in it. And the reason is because while the facts are always going to be at play, there are times where the facts that you need aren't easily accessible. The information that exists may not necessarily make the accused look good.
Okay.
And the only reason you believe in them, the only reason you believe is because of your knowledge of their culture, is because you're aware of that, of why the interpretation is what it is. And I'll give you an exact example. For a very long time, when we were talking about police killings, a lot of people would say, well, why would he run if he was innocent? A lot of Black people were like, I could tell you, I know exactly why he would run if he's innocent, right? That requires a person who is passionate, who is in that field, is adamant about proving why a person runs even if they're innocent. A person who disconnects their emotions says, you know what, let's focus on the facts. These are the facts in front of me. I can't get tied into proving whether or not he's innocent or guilty. The fact says that he appears guilty. Let's go with that.
Okay.
Right? And so I think we need the passion. I think because culturally we're so different, passion is what sways us in one direction or not. It's how I can convince you to see my perspective. It's because I'm passionate about what it is that I'm trying to explain that you might say, all right, fine, Steph, you keep bugging me about this. Go ahead.
Wow.
Why do you believe so strongly about this, right?
Yeah.
And that might be the only way I get to convince you. And you might walk away from that saying, you know what? Didn't see it from that perspective. I get it now. So that's why I believe that passion is the most important aspect of the law, because we have an incredible responsibility to help others see things from our perspective, whether it's a judge, whether it's a jury, whether for me as an immigration officer, my job is always to make sure that you get to see my perspective. And my perspective is always my client is entitled to this, but also deserve it.
Wow, well said. So now let's go to your practice now. So can you tell us more? How did you get into it? So why you choose immigration?
So I think immigration chose me, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, so I graduated in 2010. I took the bar in 2011, and 2010, the earthquake happened. Around 2011, TPS happened. So at the time that I was studying for the bar and starting my legal career, there was, and by the earthquake, I mean, there was an earthquake in Haiti, a tragic one in 2010, that led to temporary protected status for Haitian nationals. So at the time that I was starting my legal career, this thing was always right there, right? I was seeing it in the news. My family was talking about it. And I went about my way and decided to go into corporate law instead because I had debt. And then probably I'd say about late 2011, early 2012, there were a bunch of people that had applied with the initial first rush that now were having problems with the applications, right? They were applying when they weren't eligible. The people who assisted them didn't understand. There was language barrier, right? So there were mistakes made in the applications. So there were all these applications that were now being corrected. And this nonprofit organization was asking for help for TPS because they needed a person who spoke the language. So they needed volunteers, but they also needed attorneys who actually could speak Creole to assist with this. So I happened to take, I'd say, my organization, I was doing pretty well, or the company I was working with, I was doing pretty well. And so they allowed me to take about a day to volunteer. And I didn't get paid for the day, but basically you had what they call billable hours. And so they said, look, if you could bill, at least 50 hours, 4 days, we don't care what you do in the fifth, which for me was a privilege because traditionally, they're very much like, we need 70 hours. And I wouldn't have been able to do 70 in 4 days. So needless to say, I was able to volunteer a bit. And then I went back and asked for a second day. And he's like, you must have lost your natural mind. But I was able to convince him to take 2 days every other month. And so he said, if you keep up your hours, you submit your briefs on time, you're on top of your caseload, your team doesn't suffer, fine. And again, I was working so much that I had so many days to take anyway. So part of it was you don't get to go to vacation for 2 months too, right? So he got to win in a way of you use these days volunteering and then you take 2 weeks vacation instead of 2 months, which is how many days you got sitting here on the books.
Yeah.
So I started doing that, and then eventually I quit and started working full time just because I was working so many hours, I was exhausted, and I knew that the thing that I didn't want to give up was helping the immigrants. So I went from volunteering to working part-time and taking a 60% pay cut. And to eventually
that's passion right there.
Yeah, to eventually getting a full-time job, still at less than 50% of what I would have been making at the fast company. And I just actually left this past February. But at the time that I left, I was managing the program that I started off with. So it was an amazing experience. But yeah, that's how I got into immigration. I started volunteering and then decided I got to do this.
Wow, but was something you said really resonate with me. You said it's so. What's the typical hours for a lawyer? Because you said 70 hours. Is that what you're saying?
I did. So corporate, probably 80. We worked well. We did. But right now, I take it back. Right now, I'm working absurd hours again, except that this time I'm working it for me. But I feel like I've always worked absurd hours. Even when I transitioned to nonprofit, there was always a reason to work 12, 13, 14 hours and Saturdays, sometimes more.
So 12 hours a day?
Yeah, I mean, that's not 10 hours a day is more typical. 12 hours a day. So let me take it back. 10 hours a day for an attorney is the equivalent to 8 hours a day for everyone else. So your typical attorney at a minimum is doing 10. And then 12 hours would be for those of us who are like either I call it slightly busy. 14 is, okay, we got a lot of work to do, but it's expected that you do it anyway.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. But that's a passion and that's a calling too. So the way we like to call it in this podcast is embrace your calling. And so now let's go when you first started your practice, how that happened, how was your confidence level?
Yeah, I still don't know what I'm doing and I'm terrified all the time. This is by far the scariest thing I've done, more scary than law school itself.
Wow.
And yeah, it's still terrifying every day in and day out. And I decided to do it because during the pandemic,
Yep.
I was stuck in the house. I rarely had time to connect with my child, but I realized that even though I was physically in the house, I didn't have time for her. And so I took some time away because emotionally it became a lot to handle. And then once I took time away, I started to look at time differently. So the real reason I left is because even though I wanted to do the same thing, I wanted to have more control of my time, how I use my time. And I knew that if I worked for me, while I'd still work 24/7, I'd ultimately I'd have the ability to determine if ever I needed to take time away that I could, and I'd understand the consequence and I'd do the cost evaluation. But because I valued my time so much, I wanted to own it.
Okay.
If that makes sense, right?
Yeah, no,
I'm not making, right? Like I'm not making as much as I did with the job, but I
you have
feel
the
like
freedom. You have the control, like, and you can, your day look more, how can I say? It's not organized, but it's spread out. It's not just 1 hours, like 9 to 5, or I don't know, or like maybe 12 hours a day, something like that. But for me, the same way, like I manage my own business, that's why I'm allowed to do broadcasting, because you free up your schedule, but you can get something in that. But so one thing with managing your own business is you paying yourself. So how was that process for you? Because I know we're talking about a lot of people, we don't know where they are in their stage on embracing their calling. You might be starting a business, but they need to understand what entails that, where you're not getting a paycheck every week or 2 weeks. Now you're the one getting yourself paid and understanding that you have to put expensive. Yeah, so let us know. How is it for you, or did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, so I'm still volunteering for my business.
Okay.
I think my first goal was because when I started the business, I didn't really get funding. I funded it myself, but I still had to take care of my household. And so I was very modest in how I invested in the business. So my primary goal was for me to be in a position where the business could pay for itself, which is happening now. Okay. My profit is going directly back in, and it's, paying off the bills associated. I have to scale up a little bit more. So, I have to have enough to kind of pay for help. I need to purchase a little bit more tech. So my goal is probably, I'd say within the next 3 months, I should be able to have a steady salary now. Again, right now, my salary is slightly sporadic. So I pay myself quarterly because I think, although it needs consistency, as you know, as a business owner, you can't not have something. So I pay myself quarterly, but it allows me to be able to handle whatever comes up with the business, to have rent ahead, to not be focused on, oh my God, if I don't get a client, I'm not going to have rent, right? So I put everything back in for now. I get paid very, very little, the lowest I've ever been paid. So that's why I consider myself volunteering. I'm a volunteer for the business I work in. Yeah. But I'm so incredibly grateful that I could both support myself and the business with the profit from the business, which was my primary goal.
Okay. So what's the goal, like 5 year goal for the business? Where do you see the business in 5 years?
So I had a very specific idea, and I've recently tweaked that. 5 years from now, I would like to, I'd like to have at least 2 offices. So I want to keep this one, but I want to have a satellite office that is more a storefront. Right now I'm in a building. I love my building. I love my space. I don't want to leave it, but I'll probably have the back office run from here, and then I'll have an actual front office, which will be a forefront, right? So I want to have that in 5 years, and I want to bring enough in to have a retirement plan that could allow me to live my lifestyle. So my 5-year plan is to not only have a salary, not only be able to support the business and myself, but also, have staff and pay my staff well and have retirement for myself, which is a huge deal for entrepreneurs. Retirement is kind of like the scary thing.
Retirement and health insurance too, because those are the biggest part of it, where it's on you. So you have the luxury when you work for somebody, they give it to you, but when you're a business owner, everything is on you. So your vision is what's the business gonna look like. So let's switch to quickly go to your passion for justice. So, and I know you're an immigration lawyer, but how did you transition both? And when do you think your understanding that justice and your job is 2 different things, and then you can combine them? So can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So my passion for justice, let me just kind of give a little bit of background for that. John Jay College of Criminal Justice shaped me in many ways, my undergrad. It's the school that I saw the professors, but once I got there, a lot of my courses were very forward. So we looked a lot of statistics, and they didn't necessarily teach justice. I'll give you an example. I remembered taking this criminal justice course, and we were looking at profiles of criminals. And so we spent, I'd say, 80% of the class just kind of assessing profiles of criminals. And for the last 2 weeks, we compared the data between the profiles of the criminals and the makeup of the people who are imprisoned for those exact crimes. And then we applied race. And we spent the very last 2 weeks talking about, now that you know everything you know, and you're seeing what is actually happening, what do you do when you graduate? And so we spent 80% of the class just studying one thing that we had no idea where we were going to go with it, right? It was this course in criminal justice. I'm like, oh, wow, okay, so, this type of criminal is middle-aged white men. Okay, this type of criminal is this type of criminal. And you're kind of putting this together, and it's interesting and unique. And then you see like 90% of the people who are convicted of this looks this way. And you're like, wait, that doesn't match the people committing the crime? I'm confused. And so I say that to say I started thinking about justice differently during that space, because the passion and the idea behind justice is one thing. I now understood justice had a lot more to do with knowledge. And so I needed to understand why things were happening the way they were. And the perk of John Jay is also, while we were analyzing all of the injustices that were occurring in the criminal justice system, that really was our focus, and how those were tied to race, we were also having these discussions with a lot of people that were white, that were incredibly vested in justice, right? And so while race had a lot to do with injustice, I did not associate all white people with automatically being unjust. And I think it changed my perspective in how I viewed justice, right? I associated a lot more with knowledge. Who teaches you and what they teaches you has a lot more to do with how just of a human being you become than the color of your skin, right? And so I took that view into everything, including immigration.
Wow. Stephanie, I really like you being here, because what you're saying really makes sense to us. And I think our guests will very appreciate your input. So we're gonna switch to Hot Topic. So Hot Topic is a segment where we talk about things that really touchy and people don't really talk about. But my question to you, in the wake of Black Lives Matter, so can you talk about your perspective and how that influenced you as a lawyer?
Absolutely. First, I'll say one of the toughest things to do during the pandemic was watch tapes of people who look like me be killed. It impacted me greatly. I think the fact is, almost everyone who is Black who lives in America will tell you that they have either experienced injustice or they've witnessed it based purely on their color at one point of their life. And we've all been screaming this for the top of our lungs for a very long time. And so seeing non-Blacks seem to discover this for the first time was interesting, because I was like, wait, all this time everybody's been saying it, you thought we were all making up the same story? That we just literally all got together and just claimed the same exact thing all across America. But yeah, so Black Lives Matter to me. I'm happy to see that people who traditionally do not discuss this are finally paying attention. I don't think enough has been done. I don't think we're even close. I don't think we've even scratched the surface. But the conversation is the most important first step, and I'm grateful that that's happening.
So, but all that impact your job and your view of your power as a lawyer to help or to kind of change the system?
So one of the things I mentioned from the beginning is that passion, I think, is one of the most important requirements to practice law. And this kind of field is a perfect example of that. If you are passionate about the idea that a person's skin should not make them more likely to die, their skin color should not make them more likely to die from an innocent encounter, if that concept is something you believe in, I think that's something we could all fight for equally. And I think attorneys have a duty to serve in any way they can. So as an immigration attorney, I'm not going to be ideal to represent people who are locked up and, to help them get out. But I can absolutely inform people who want to protest, if you're an immigrant, what are the consequences to your immigration status and how do you protect yourself? I think, a finance attorney could say, okay, well, if you're going to raise money, let me use my skill set to make sure that I help you, invest it properly, use a certain amount, and make sure this account is properly done. I think a tax attorney could say, hey, Black Lives Matter organization, you guys are doing this great work, I'll handle your taxes for free, right? I think no matter what it is you do, you can come into this and say, this is my skill set, this is what I do well. Let me apply this to the situation so that I could do something for you to make it easier for you to fight for us.
Wow, well said. So this is just more as a personal question, but people can learn from this so I have kids, and you mentioned you have a daughter which is 4. So is there, I'm sorry, what is it?
She's amazing. I just said she's amazing.
So now that's the question, in living in the US, do you have that conversation with them yet? Or do you approach that?
So during the Black Lives Matter protests, we did watch a few. We talked about the idea that some people will be afraid of her because of the color of her skin, and people who respond to fear may attack you and hurt you because they think they're protecting themselves. And she, on a very shallow level, she was very much like, well, that makes no sense. Why wouldn't they just get past their own fear and actually ask me, talk to me and realize I'm not scary? And I was like, well, because not everybody's as bright as you, honey. You have to have a little bit of patience with them, but that means also being aware. Now she's 4, she's never alone, she's never unattended. So the idea wasn't necessarily that it was going to matter then. It was a seed, because I wasn't sure what direction our country was going to go in. And I wanted to plant a seed so that if we needed to have more conversations, we would. But thank goodness, I'm grateful that we didn't need to discuss it further.
Yeah, and I'm glad, and I think people gonna appreciate this advice. So I have a son, he's 3, so I'm a little bit. I'm just waiting a little bit. So, but at the end of the day, there should be a conversation, and we want to encourage everybody. If you have kids, you have teenagers, so you need to talk to them, understanding what's the situation is and how they can protect themselves the right way. So let's switch to TPS. So I know TPS just get renewed for Haitian, TPS for Haiti now, and I don't know if you want to talk about it. So what people should expect.
Yes, thank you for bringing it up. I'm so happy that you did. Not enough people are talking about TPS. So first, TPS is temporary protected for Haitian nationals. And the very first time TPS was granted to Haitian nationals was in 2010 as a result of a massive earthquake that occurred in 2010. Yes. 2011, it was expanded and allowed people who came shortly after the earthquake to be able to take advantage. Between 2011 and 2021, people who already had TPS back then were able to continue to renew so long as they renewed on time. At one point in 2016, 17-ish, the last administration attempted to end TPS. And then there was a court decision that basically granted an injunction. And what an injunction is stopping something from happening or allowing it to happen for a limited time. So certain states sued the administration and asked the court to give an injunction, which is don't enforce this administration's plan to end TPS, allow people to keep it. The court granted the injunction, and so people who had TPS just kept it. Did that part make sense, right?
Yes, yeah.
Fast forward 2021, Biden's administration grants a new TPS. The first one was back in May of 2021, and it was in connection to the civil unrest. Shortly after that, the president of Haiti was assassinated. And so the White House granted a new date, right? Not a new date, but at the time of the assassination, the date of TPS hadn't been set yet, right? So while he announced it in May in 2021, that was just the announcement. The procedure hasn't been applied. Between May and July, the assassination occurred. And so July 21, 2021 was the first day or was when the new TPS was implemented. So currently, as it stands, there is TPS for Haitian nationals. If you were here in July 2021 or earlier, you're automatically entitled to it. Everyone should be applying for TPS right now, including those who had it back in 2010. And this is why I need to explain this part. So remember I mentioned the injunction? What the injunction did is it automatically allowed people to keep their TPS without doing anything. They didn't have to submit papers. They didn't have to do anything. After Trump's administration, a lot of people who had TPS from 2010 or 2011 just kept having it without having to do anything. So now those who had the 2010 and 2011 have to renew, and those who never had TPS at all but were present prior to July 21st, 2021, they can apply for TPS for the first time. So it's slightly different. You should absolutely speak to a lawyer before you submit it. A lot of us are suggesting that people, even if you have the 2021, you apply for the new one. Even if you have the 2011, that you apply for the new one instead of renewing the old one. And part of the reason is because you're eligible for it anyway, because if you had it in 2010 and you stayed here this whole time, that means you were here in 2021. Second reason is because I mentioned the prior one exists because of an injunction. So if that injunction is lifted, between the time that it's resolved, your status may be affected. You will very likely still be eligible for the 2021 TPS, but you may have to submit a request to get your documents, etc. So while the 2021 TPS doesn't necessarily guarantee that it won't be attacked by a new administration, it's less likely that that can be in jeopardy anytime soon.
Wow. I didn't know that because I thought people who had it first, they all say all good now. So only the people who came after that need to apply. But what you're saying, if there's something changed on the injunction, they would have to apply. Is that what you're saying?
They may. So what I'm saying is the people who had 2010 and 2011, when Trump tried to end the TPS, a court gave an injunction, which is what is protecting their TPS now. An injunction is technically temporary in nature. And so what that means is your status is directly connected to some court decision that is technically in dispute. Yeah. 2021 has no court decision connected to it. It's brand new, it's fresh, and it's clean. It's the shiny new thing.
Wow.
So I'm not suggesting that, you should fear losing it. What I'm saying is if you have the choice, I would choose the shiny new thing. If you keep the old one, you might be fine. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. Biden might fight it. Yeah, right. Biden might fight it and request that the injunction stay in place. Technically speaking, the Trump administration is gone, so there's no way for them to win, but the states can come back and perhaps have the court find that TPS from 2010 and 2011 should remain in place. And if that decision as a final decision is made, you're good, right? What I'm saying is that 2021 TPS has absolutely no court proceedings connected to it. 2011 TPS does have a court proceeding connected to it. So given the choice between the TPS that's connected to a court proceeding and the TPS that has no court proceeding, I would choose the one with no court proceedings because, again, you can get either one you want. You qualify for both, right? You have your option. You could just renew or you could apply for the brand new one.
But I heard that people said there is a transition when you have TPS, it can lead to permanent residence. So is that the first one might be affected if you transfer to the new one? So is there... yeah, go ahead.
So that's a difficult question to answer because as of 2 days ago, I would have said that is absolutely incorrect. TPS does not lead to any lawful permanent resident status.
Okay.
However, Monday, the new House finance bill, the new bill that Joe Biden was pushing passed. Well, not passed, but the bill itself passed. Right now, they're just kind of discussing the details, right? What is going to be funded and what is not. Part of Biden's mission, or part of what Biden claimed he was going to included a path to citizenship for TPS and DACA recipients.
Okay.
As it stands, we don't have any reason to believe that that is actually happening. However, the passing of that bill means that that's technically back at play. He could put it back on the table and they could talk and discuss the tweaks. So 2 days ago, I would have said absolutely not. TPS will not lead to lawful permanent resident. Today, I don't know. However, whether you have the 2021 or the 2010 will not be the deciding factor if TPS leads to lawful permanent resident. Now, here's why people might think that it did. When Joe Biden proposed his path to citizenship, one of the requirements was that you had TPS or you had DACA, but that you had a certain amount of years of residence. People probably associated that with, if I've had TPS for 10 years, obviously I meet it.
Okay.
TPS is not the only way to prove residence. There's other methods to prove residence. So if you've been here since 2014, you missed out on the first TPS. You qualify for 2021 TPS. You have been here since 2014, so technically you've been here for 7 years. If you need to show residence for 5 years, even if you don't have the prior TPS, you're probably still going to be able to do that.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Perfect sense. And thank you for giving us all the insight, all the details about TPS. We will probably clear a lot of confusion for people. So we like to leave the end to talk about fun stuff. What do you like to do on your free time? Or did you ever travel to Haiti?
Yes.
I
do actually love to travel. I haven't been to Haiti since a few years now, probably 5 or 6.
Okay.
But I love traveling on my free time. That's what I like to do, travel.
All right. So, like I said, we enjoyed this conversation with you. So, last word for you, Stephanie.
The recent earthquake hurt a lot of our people. So if you can help, please do so. I'm not going to give any organizations to donate, but look it up. Try to avoid the big ones. Look for the small ones. I am an immigration lawyer, law office of Stephanie Delia in New York, Queens, New York to be exact. Feel free to hit me up if you want to talk more about TPS. There'll be a charge for a consultation fee. Don't worry about
that. Would they get a discount?
Of course. If you see me and know you, I got that.
Oh, wow. No, definitely. Thank you, Stephanie Delia. We appreciate you spending the time with us, and we had a great conversation. This episode is brought to you by Daci's Facilities Management. We will have an episode every Wednesday. Every Wednesday, you can check us on YouTube. You can listen to our podcast on Apple Podbean, podbean.com. This is Eddie Dacius. We had a great interview, good podcast with Stephanie Delia. She's an immigration lawyer. We'll get you guys soon. Thank you for the time. Bye.
Hey, thank you for watching the Divine Purpose podcast on YouTube. For more streaming with interesting guests and premium content, subscribe now on DP Podcast Live.